Well, hello everybody. It is time for Bible Study Wednesday. We are still in 1 Kings, and I want you to know something here. Now, 1 Kings hasn't been all that, well, shall we say, thrilling lately. But I want us to get something here. In these stories of the kings, we are getting what the message was to the people of Israel in exile. Remember, this stuff was written after the fact, of course, right? Well, it had a specific audience, okay? The audience for all of this was the exilic community. The community that found itself not in the land of promise, but in Babylon. They had been disobedient. They were wondering, where is our God? What is it? Where do we go from here? Will we ever get our worship back? In these stories of the kings, we get a prescription for, okay, how is it that you will be able to save yourself, I guess? Like, what is the prescription for the right kind of behavior that will coincide with the promise that God has given you? That's what we're talking about. So we're in 1 Kings 15. I'm going to start with 15:33, and then we're going to go through chapter 16. In these stories, there is, remember, the way of the king is the way of the people. That's just the way that is. That's the reason, one of the reasons why it is so important that that Jesus, the Messiah, be of the house of David, because he proves that, oh, a king can do it right. This house of David promise. Now, in chapter 15, verse 33, we are talking about kings in Israel. We're not going to get another story about a king in Judah, the southern kingdom, until, I don't know, probably about chapter 22-ish or something like that. It's much later in the book of 1 Kings. Why? Because the writer is trying to toggle back and forth from the north to the south, and we already had been told about the long reign of this one in the south, and there were several kings in Israel, the northern kingdom, during all of that time. Remember, the perspective of our narrator, of our writer, is that Israel just started off bad and just got worse, okay? That it was founded on faulty precepts. Remember, the first king of the northern kingdom was Jeroboam. Jeroboam had been Solomon's chief over forced labor. Yeah. Well, and then what does Jeroboam do? He erects temples to foreign gods, and then that's the worst you could do already. And then seriously, it just goes downhill from there. Okay, so here in verse 33 of chapter 15, in the third year of King Asa of Judah, we'd already been told about the reign of King Asa of Judah, but he reigned quite a few years, over 20. Baasha, son of Ahijah, began to reign over all Israel at Tirzah. He reigned 24 years. He did what was evil in the sight of the Lord, walking in the way of Jeroboam and in the sin that he caused Israel to commit. So this is just a summary statement. There is, we've seen this name Ahijah before. We don't know if this is the same Ahijah that is the prophet from Shiloh who had talked to Jeroboam and brought the word of the Lord to him. We don't know for sure. It might be. But remember, these works that we call history are actually theological works. In the Hebrew Bible, in the Tanakh, they call this the former prophets. And I think it's because I think it's because of the fact that there's a lot of prophets in these narratives. It's just that they don't have their own books. That came later with what we call the latter prophets. Verse 34, or chapter 16, verse 1. The word of the Lord came to Jehu, son of Hanani, against Baasha, saying, so here's another one of those prophets, prophet Jehu. Since I exalted you out of the dust and made you leader over my people Israel, and you have walked in the way of Jeroboam and have caused my people Israel to sin, provoking me to anger with their sins, therefore I will consume Baasha and his house. Does that sound familiar? Yeah. The same thing happened to Jeroboam, and a prophet gave him that word. And I will make your house like the house of Jeroboam, son of Nebat. Anyone belonging to Baasha who dies in the city, the dogs shall eat, and anyone of his who dies in the field, the birds of the air shall eat. This is a formulaic expression. We heard this before. It's one way of saying, one of the biggest, one of the worst things that can happen to you is to die and not have a burial. This was just the way they thought. And so to say that everybody out of your family is going to die, and that means it doesn't matter whether they live in the city or in the country. If they're living in the city, yeah, the dogs lead them up. And if it's a country, then the birds. But they're not even going to be honored with a proper burial. This is a complete repeat of what happened to the house of Jeroboam. Verse 5. Now the rest of the acts of Baasha, what he did and his power, are they not written in the book of the annals of the kings of Israel? Baasha slept with his ancestors and was buried at Tirzah. Tirzah was kind of like the capital of Israel at that time. And his son Elah succeeded him. Moreover, the word of the Lord came by the prophet Jehu, son of Hanani, against Baasha and his house, both because of all the evil he did in the sight of the Lord, provoking him to anger with the work of his hands in being like the house of Jeroboam, and also because he destroyed it. So, notice we don't get any details, none whatsoever, we don't get facts. All we get is a theological judgment. And this is one of the things that we've got to keep in mind when we read scripture that we call history. It's not really history. What we're getting is an evaluation, a theological evaluation. Verse 8. In the 26th year of King Asa of Judah, remember, we're still talking about the northern kingdom, but it's being scored in the years of the king in Judah, the southern kingdom. Elah, son of Baasha, began to reign over Israel in Tirzah. Remember, that's the capital. He reigned 2 years. But his servant Zimri, commander of half his chariots, kind of like, not really a commander of the army, but the chariots is kind of like, I don't know, kind of like the cavalry, if you will, or like modern day tanks, I guess, something like that. Commander of half his chariots conspired against him when he was at Tirzah, talking about King Elah. When he was at Tirzah, drinking himself drunk in the house of Arza, who was in charge of the palace at Tirzah, Zimri came in and struck him down and killed him. in the 27th year of King Asa of Judah, he succeeded him. So there's this, just a flat out coup, okay? He takes advantage of his drunken state and he takes over. Yes, this is gnarly, this is seedy. But one of the things that our writer wants us to get is that the beginnings of this kingdom to the north, it started out bad. So it can't get better. So yeah, it's gonna get worse. And it still is going to. Watch, listen. Verse 11, when he began to reign, remember he had just taken over by killing the king. When he began to reign, as soon as he had seated himself on his throne, he killed all the house of Baasha. He did not leave him a single male of his kindred or his friends. Is that not exactly what the prophet Jehu had said would happen? One of the things that's happening in this retelling is our narrator wants us to get the power of the prophetic word from the Lord. That what the word from the Lord says is going to happen. And it doesn't matter whether you like it or not. The word of the Lord is what's going to rule the day. Thus, verse 12, thus Zimri destroyed all the house of Baasha according to the word of the Lord, which he spoke against Baasha by the prophet Jehu, because of all the sins of Baasha and the sins of his son Elah that they committed and that they caused Israel to commit, provoking the Lord God of Israel to anger with their idols. There we get a hint of what they actually did. We said with their idols. We're not told which idols if they introduced any new ones. We just know that they didn't destroy the ones from Jeroboam. Verse 14, now the rest of the acts of Elah and all that he did, are they not written in the annals of the books of the kings of Israel? See, intentionally not giving us everything. He's telling us right here, I'm not giving you history. I'm giving you a theological evaluation. This is what's happening. This is the way all stuff, narrative is in our scriptures. And we make a mistake when we try to treat it as history, when really what it is a theological evaluation. Verse 15. In the 27th year of King Asa of Judah, Zimri reigned 7 days, 7 days in Tirzah. Now the troops, meanwhile, there's a war going on with the Philistines. Now the troops were encamped against Gibbethon, which belongs to the Philistines, and the troops who were encamped heard it, said, Zimri has conspired, and he has killed the king. They knew who Zimri was. Remember, he was over half the chariots, but he wasn't actually in this field of battle because this looked like the infantry. Therefore, all Israel made Omri, the commander of the army, king over Israel that day in the camp. So you see, they basically set up an alternate king to Zimri. So Omri obviously was some sort of a field commander, right? So Omri went up from Gibbethon, and all Israel with him. That's a euphemistic expression, by the way. All Israel with him doesn't necessarily mean all Israel. It just means that, he had a lot of support behind him. And they besieged Tirzah. Remember, that's the capital where Zimri was. When Zimri saw that the city was taken, he went into the citadel of the king's house. He burned down the king's house over himself with fire and died. Basically commits suicide by setting the house on fire. Because of the sins that he committed, doing evil in the sight of the Lord, walking in the way of Jeroboam, and for the sin that he committed, causing Israel to sin. See? Theological evaluation. Now the rest of the acts of Zimri and the conspiracy that he made, are they not written in the book of the annals of the kings of Israel? So there's Zimri's 7-day reign. He gets a lot, I mean, that's a lot of words for somebody who only reigned 7 days, right? Verse 21. Then the people of Israel were divided into 2 parts. See, it just gets worse. Half of the people followed Tibni, son of Ginath, to make him king, and half followed Omri. So we don't know where this Tibni guy came from. But we do know Omri, he was the field commander, right, of the army. So our narrator is painting a power struggle, right? Verse 22. But the people who followed Omri overcame the people who followed Tibni, son of Ginath. So Tibni died, and Omri became king. So there was obviously a few, days there where there was some days, or was it years? No, it looked like about, had to have been, notice it says the 31st year of King Asa of Judah. It looks like there's probably about 4 or 5 years where there was where this battle was going on. In the 31st year of King Asa of Judah, Omri began to reign over Israel. He reigned for 12 years, 6 of them in Tirzah. He bought the hill of Samaria from Shemer for 2 talents of silver. So the hill of Samaria is where the city Samaria will eventually be built. This is one of those stories that we had a story similar to this when David bought somebody's it was a threshing floor, I believe it was, for a certain amount of money. Then it ends up being the place where the temple got built. It ends up being on Mount Zion and all of that. Well, this is one of those stories also where it tells us, it answers the question, how did Samaria become the capital of the northern kingdom? This is how it happened. Remember, Tirzah had been it, but that just fell, right? When Omri when Zimri committed suicide in the king's house. Verse 24, he bought the hill of Samaria from Shemer for 2 talents of silver. He fortified the hill and called the city that he built Samaria, after the name of Shemer, the owner of the hill. So if you ever want to know, well, where did that name come from of Samaria? The guy's name was Shemer. There you go. Samaria. Verse 25. Wait a second. Do you remember that word? Do you remember that word? This is one of those words this is one of those stories that seeks to answer the question, well, how did that start? There you go. Verse 25. Omri did what was evil in the sight of the Lord. How could he not, right? He did more evil, listen to this, than all who were before him. For he walked in all the way of Jeroboam, son of Nebat. Can't let that alone. The original king just set him on a bad track, apparently. And in the sins that he caused Israel to commit, provoking the Lord, the God of Israel, to anger by their idols. That's all we get. We don't get any details about the idols or what they did or didn't do with them. Just that they didn't change their ways. Verse 27, now the rest of the acts of Omri that he did and the power that he showed, are they not written in the book of the annals of the kings of Israel? Omri slept with his ancestors and was buried in Samaria. His son, Ahab, succeeded him. Okay, so we're getting now to Ahab. And we've already been told that this last king, Omri, was worse than all the ones before. Oh, but just wait. Here's Ahab. In the 38th year of King Asa of Judah. So remember this long reign of King Asa of Judah. Because of the fact that it was so long, it means that we spend this extended amount of time talking about the kings of Israel. In the 38th year of King Asa of Judah, Ahab, son of Omri, began to reign over Israel. Ahab, son of Omri, reigned over Israel in Samaria 22 years. Ahab, son of Omri, did evil in the sight of the Lord more than all who were before him. So, yes, theological judgment. But we're gonna get a little fuel on this fire. Look at this, verse 31. And as if it had been a light thing for him to walk in the sins of Jeroboam, son of Nebat, which meant that he let the idol worship stand, he took as his wife Jezebel, daughter of King Ethbaal of the Sidonians, and went and served Baal and worshipped him. It's bad enough to say that he was worse than all the ones before, but to make it even worse, he took as his wife this. So this is the reason why the word Jezebel gets, it's like a euphemism, if you will, for, a temptress, somebody who makes the king go wrong. He was already wrong. Okay. Verse 32. By the way, the word in Jezebel, see in that word, in her name, it includes that name Baal, but you only see it in the bell at the end. But yeah, and daughter of King Ethbaal, yeah. Guess what king or what god he was all about, right? Yeah, the Baal gods. Who were the Baal gods? The Baal gods were the gods of the Canaanites of that area before Israel took over. It was a very, what's the word? Consumeristic, very much into I've compared it sometimes to the prosperity gospel that we have today that says basically, oh, if you say the right prayers and do the right things, God will bless you and give you good, that kind of thing. Verse 32, he erected an altar for Baal in the house of Baal, which he built in Samaria. Ahab also made a sacred pole. The sacred pole, the word for that is Asherah. The sacred Asherah, Baal and Asherah were seen as consort gods that would had sex with each other. Yes, that's the way those religions worked. When Ahab set up the sacred poles, it meant that he was totally caving to this nature religion that had already existed. Ahab did more to provoke the anger of the Lord, the God of Israel, than had all the kings of Israel who were before him. I think Omri did that before. In his days, Hiel of Bethel built Jericho. He laid its foundation at the cost of Abiram, his firstborn, and set up its gates at the cost of his youngest son, Segub, according to the word of the Lord, which he spoke by Joshua, son of Nun. What is that about? Okay. Remember how I've mentioned this before. This is the historian, we call him the Deuteronomistic Historian. Why do we call him that? Because it starts from the book of Deuteronomy through Joshua, Judges, Samuel, Kings. It's all leveled with the same brush. And if you look in the book of Joshua, chapter 6, verse 26, do you remember that incident where Joshua sent spies into the land? And there was this harlot named Rahab in Jericho. That's where we're going with this, Jericho. That's what was mentioned here in verse 34. And the harlot Rahab, she housed and lied about housing the spies. And this, like I said, was in Jericho. And she was rewarded for that. But in the incident, Joshua himself proclaims a curse on Jericho, saying, Cursed before the Lord be anyone who tries to build this city, this Jericho. At the cost of his firstborn he shall lay its foundations, and at the cost of his youngest he shall set up its gates. So the Lord was with Joshua, and his fame was in all the land. So this Deuteronomistic historian is wanting to close the loop on that prophecy that had that curse. It's really a curse that had been thrown out there, and now it had truly been fulfilled with this action of Ahab when he had Jericho. It's actually being rebuilt, but it cost him his firstborn, and set up its gates at the cost of his youngest son Segub, according to the word of the Lord, which he spoke by Joshua son of Nun. So yeah, so there you get the tie-in there. So that's all we're going to cover for today. We're going to be in chapter 17 next week, and then we're going to start getting into some more stories of the actual prophets, like Elijah and such. But what I want us to get is how this is a prescription for the people in exile. They can see, how we had gone wrong. I don't know if it's about, okay, we could say that what our writer is trying to do is give the people a sense of not saying like, well, it wasn't your fault because your kings were bad. I think it's trying to bring home a point of personal responsibility. That, yeah, the king is supposed to be somebody that leads us in the ways of righteousness, but you know what? That's no excuse. You gotta make sure that you are the one following the Lord the way you know it. It's a prescription. They didn't know for sure if they were going to get back to the land, but if you can imagine being in exile and wondering, asking the question, well, where did we go wrong? As far as our biblical theologian, narrator, is concerned, it went wrong when the kings introduced foreign worship. And this is emphasized over and over and over again. So we get a little break from that, though, here in the next few chapters, because we're going to stick with the reign of Ahab and hear some things. So that's where we're going to be next week. I hope that you can take this lesson of what Scripture is, especially when it has the guise of history, but in reality, it's theological reflection. It should. I hope you can reflect on that and see how that's valuable in understanding narratives in the New Testament, especially in the Gospels, especially in Acts. How we don't get straightforward history; we get theological judgment. We get a way of looking at history that enables us that gives us a prescription for behavior. It's supposed to try and teach us something, not just by recounting facts, but by giving us theological underpinnings. So that is it for this week. Until then, peace.